Hello and welcome to the weekly edition of The Wrap. I am WRAL State Government Reporter Will Doran.
And I'm WRAL State Government Reporter Travis Fain.
And we are both getting caught up a little bit. I just recently got back from paternity leave, and you just recently got back from vacation.
Missed almost 2 weeks. I think it's the longest vacation I've had in a decade. And I'm not going to lie, it was nice.
Well, you didn't miss a whole lot. The legislature's been pretty quiet lately, although on Wednesday we had just a huge flurry of activity. They made up for about a month and a half of doing nothing with trying to jam it all into one day.
Yeah, that's what it looked like. I feel a little bad because that was my last day on vacation. And like I looked at the calendar, I was like, I guess I could. Nah, I think I'll take my final day. And then it ended up kind of going into the evening, so sorry about that.
Yeah, you couldn't cut it one day short to help us out, but that's okay. We're glad that you had a good vacation. But the big thing was veto overrides. There were half a dozen bills that are now law. The legislature overrode the vetoes. We had several pro-charter school changes and also some especially anti-transgender changes. There was one that would limit what kind of treatment the doctors can give to minors, people under 18, when they have gender dysphoria, and no surgery, no puberty blockers, things like that. Bill blocking transgender athletes in schools, and specifically transgender girls from playing women's sports in schools. The timing on that was big because obviously schools are just about to start up, and so now those rules will go into effect for this new school year. Democrats said there's really only a handful of these cases statewide, very, very small number out of all the hundreds of thousands of kids who play sports in schools. This is really kind of a solution in search of a problem. But Republicans said there might be only a few cases, but that means that there are cases, and they think that this is important, and they don't want to have girls competing with, as they say, biological boys.
Yeah, and now we're going to see we always say is so important with bills like some of these is what it looks like in implementation. And that's not so much for the transgender medical care. I think that bill's fairly straightforward in what it says. Or really the Fairness in Sports Act, although, what we're going to be confirming and how we're going to be confirming it, I don't know that we want to. But it does seem fairly straightforward, those two. But the Parental Bill of Rights, this is the one where it says if you're a teacher and a kid comes to you and expresses some questions about their gender identity, you're supposed to tell the parents. And you're not supposed to, in the curriculum for, what was it, up to fourth grade, I think it was, at the end, basically talk about sexuality or gender or any of these issues. And so what does that look like in practice? Because what the fear has been is that it's going to be teachers feeling like they have to out kids to their parents if they're questioning their sexuality or their gender or any of these things. And not everybody's parents are going to be accepting of that.
Right.
So what sort of chilling effect does it have on schools? And we don't know until we see what it looks like in 115 different public school districts.
Right. Well, what we've heard from the conservative sponsors is that they think that's absolutely what should be happening. They say schools should not be helping kids keep secrets from their parents. It's called the Parents' Bill of Rights. They say parents have the ultimate responsibility to guide their child's development, their moral and religious upbringing, and if they are, have a different name or personality at school than they do at home, sponsors of this bill say parents have a right to know about that. Supporters say that, this could have, terrible effects if, those kids end up getting beaten or, thrown out on the street by their parents. They fear it could lead to an increase in suicides. We've seen already some education officials indicating, kind of like you referenced earlier, that they may not follow the rules here, and kind of expressing support for LGBTQ students in the wake of this passing. So this could be the sort of thing that, leads to parents suing the schools over the next few years and, saying that they were kept in the dark. We'll just have to see what happens.
And in an environment where we've got, teacher shortages, where we're waiting to find out what teacher salaries will be because the state budget continues to just be, punted 2 weeks down the road, 2 weeks down the road, 2 weeks down the road. So, and there's a bunch of stuff here in this bill, too, where teachers various things have to be put online. And I mean, it'll be interesting to see how teachers take this. I mean, it may not be the kind of thing that really moves the needle with teachers at all. I don't know. We'll have to wait and find out.
We'll see. Finally, other bill that veto override passed was the Building Code Board reorganization. This was one of a series of power grab bills that are up at the legislature, and it's kind of an arcane topic, the Building Code Board. Democrats, however, said that they're concerned because they think the changes could make us ineligible to get funding from FEMA in the future. Say a hurricane hits the coast or some other sort of disaster happens, and normally FEMA would funnel millions of dollars into the state to help with the disaster relief. They're worried that some of these changes are going to make us ineligible for that funding. Republicans not concerned. We didn't really hear them address why they're not concerned over that on Wednesday, but the override passed. There's also another power grab bill that passed or I should say that didn't pass yet, which is to change control over the State Board of Elections ahead of 2024. And Republicans have tried this several times. It's been shot down by the courts as unconstitutional. It's been shot down by voters in various different forms. This version is a little bit different from some of those past ones, but still appears to be pretty similar to what's been ruled unconstitutional. However, there's a new majority at the court. Republicans have power now, and they've been pretty clear that they expect the court to rule in their favor now. So
yeah, right. You say, well, you're going to get sued on this, and they're like, yeah, bring it.
Yeah, we'd love to get sued, please.
We're going to change some precedent here. And I mean, who knows how far-reaching that will be, because it could end up being not just the Board of Elections. There's a separate bill that I don't think passed while I was gone, which deals with like the Board of Transportation and other boards, right? Is that still in the process, or is that
no
512?
That went through on Wednesday.
All right, You can tell I've paid a lot of attention.
Yeah.
So all these different power structures are kind of back up for grabs once the Supreme Court reopens this thing, and we saw what happens when the Supreme Court reopens things earlier with redistricting. So yeah,
exactly.
But that Board of Elections bill, that's one of two elections bills?
Correct. So yeah, while that didn't move this week, the other one did. The 747, which the Democrats have punningly called the jumbo jet.
You want to know something funny? When they started calling that the jumbo jet of voter suppression, it didn't occur to me that the bill number was 747. And I was like, look at this hyperbole. Like, I can't believe, like, you're just pulling this out of a hat. And then, no, I'm the idiot, because it's 747 is obviously a very famous airplane.
Yes. Republicans, however, call it a jumbo jet of election integrity. So this is the big debate that we have with this. The main change is targeting mail-in voting, and it's going to get rid of the 3-day grace period that we have right now for ballots to kind of arrive after 3 days after election day and still be counted as long as they're postmarked on time before the election. And again, this is kind of based, actually directly based on former President Donald Trump and his claims in 2020 when he, falsely claimed victory on election night when not all the states, including North Carolina, were even finished counting their votes yet. And there's just been this, push by conservative activists to do something about that and make it so that doesn't happen again in the future. And this is our Republican leaders responding to that. Yeah,
it's this idea that if I don't know the election results immediately, then maybe my competitors are making up ballots, because now they know, like, oh, here's how many we need. We'll manufacture it, as if that's some easy thing to do. It'll be interesting. I don't know that the 3-day grace period is really going to cause that big of an issue. The concern is, well, you're going to throw out good ballots, and they probably will in some cases, and plenty of people will argue rightly that one is too many. But the way we always tend to cope with the election rules, right? We finally set the rules, we fight over the rules, we set the rules, and then everybody deals with the rules, right. And it tends to work out okay. Election seems to be fine. There's also a signature matching pilot program.
Yes, that I think has the potential to cause more problems, and that's why they made it into a pilot program. Originally, they were just going to start requiring signature matching right off the bat here. And the concern with that is a lot of people...
On absentee ballots,
for mail-in voting, yeah.
Yeah. So someone has to look at a previous piece of paper you've signed in the election office, and also what comes in via mail. If you're old, maybe your signature has changed.
Maybe your signature has changed, or maybe, like a lot of people, you signed up to vote at the DMV when you got your driver's license, and you just signed on one of those little electronic pads with a little stylus where everyone just kind of scribbles on it. And then, if when you're actually doing your real signature on your absentee ballot, it's not going to match your scribble from that electronic pad, and your vote might get thrown out.
Yeah, and there's a multi-million cost to this pilot program. If I don't remember the exact numbers. So, and then a third thing, and this is not in the bill, but I continue to wonder if it's going to end up having more impact on the absentee ballot, the mail-in vote, and that's the voter ID law, which has been law for a decade, or maybe not this time. Sorry, several years. And then, due to lawsuits, was on hold, but now is back in effect
actually in place
for the municipal elections, and then for 2024 as well. You have to send a photocopy of your driver's license or your ID, your voter ID, in with your absentee ballot now.
Correct.
And so that is going to have a significant impact, I would think, because how many people, if absentee voting by mail is about, in some ways, convenience, well, I don't have a photocopier in my home. So
right.
Now how do I get around that if I'm homebound and want it? So a lot of changes coming to mail-in voting, but the bill that you were talking about, 747, also has new rules for poll observers where they're going to be allowed more mobility, if I remember correctly, in an election spot, right?
Correct, yeah, and Republican activists have been pushing for this really heavily, again, post-Trump. They think that, giving poll observers more power, more freedom inside polling places is going to help them unearth fraud. Trump had all of these dozens of lawsuits in 2020, unable to prove any of these claims. They think that maybe in the future they will be able to prove more claims of fraud that they believe exist if they
right.
have more power.
If only they leaning over people's shoulders a little more carefully, that'll do it.
Right, and that's the concern that we've heard from opponents is they think, okay, you're going to give these partisan actors the ability to kind of like look at people's ballots and see who they're voting for, listen in on their conversations that they're having with other people in, the voting enclosure, and they think it's just going to lead to voter intimidation.
Yeah, it's going to be a changing of the rules, and again, implementation will be interesting to see. The other thing I want to note real quickly is open primaries. Did that end up surviving in the bill to where every party in the state has to have an open primary where they allow unaffiliated voters to vote in their primaries? I believe that was in the bill.
Yes, that is in the bill. There was some consternation about that, especially from some conservative activists, but the legislature did not seem too concerned. They wanted to keep those primaries open, and which means that unaffiliated voters can choose which party's primary they want to participate in.
And I know I saw some consternation on that from, say, the Constitution Party. But I mean, the bigger thing to me seemed to be like the Republican Party, which continually decides it wants to have open primaries, but there's always a contingent of the Republican Party who doesn't want that. So this
right.
kind of shuts down that debate and that push that happens, I think, every couple of years in the Republican Party, because now they can just be like, oh, no, state law, got to do it. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, it's state law, and that, I think that just solves some headaches for the party leaders, too, who don't have to deal with that every couple of years. You mentioned the budget earlier. That's still not really going anywhere. We're expecting to see that in mid-September, but we will give you some more details on that and why that's held up after we come back with a quick break from our sponsors. All right, so like we said, the budget is still delayed. We may see some action mid-September, probably at the earliest. One, that means Medicaid expansion is going to be delayed until December due to just some complications with federal rules. That also means teachers are going to be starting the school year off without the pay raises they thought they'd be getting. And by the way, Travis, why can't we know what those raises are? The GOP leaders have said that they've come to a deal on raises for state employees, on tax cuts, but they're not putting that out there publicly.
Yeah, I'm guessing it's because they don't think it's going to be well received. I don't know why you keep secrets from people you think are going to love the news. And it's also probably because they want that to be negotiated and done, and they don't want to reopen the issue, and they want to finish the budget. And they don't think they're going to finish the rest of the budget for a while, and they just don't want to hear yada, yada, yada. Why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do that? But yeah, supposedly the raises are done. They're decided. Supposedly the tax cuts are done and decided. These are all things hammered out behind closed doors in what I can't think of a process that ought to be more public than the expenditure of public dollars
right.
for public employees and what we all pay in taxes, and yet they just keep it a secret.
Yeah, public doesn't get to know, and it's probably going to move forward, I would imagine, very quickly once it does become public.
Once it does become public, although casinos, big holdup.
Yes, so, they're still trying to figure out, from what we understand, where to put all the pork in the budget and also what to do with casinos. our colleague Brian Murphy has reported a ton about this. If you need to get caught up, go read his reporting. It's been really good, in-depth stuff. We've seen some local governments starting to act like casinos are a done deal. Some movement in Rocky Mount and Reedsville where there's been rumors that the legislation is going to kind of steer casinos too. But the legislature barely passed sports betting earlier this year, and casinos are a big step forward. Beyond that, they also won't pass medical marijuana at all. And, you look at polling, and that's more popular than gambling is. So I got to kind of wonder, is this really going to happen? Are Republicans, especially kind of to the more far right wing of the party, are they going to be okay with passing a budget that includes both casino legalization and Medicaid expansion?
And potentially other gambling expansions too, because the video lottery terminals, which look, folks, if you've got a way to distinguish between what a VLT or a VLG is and video poker, you send that my way. They look like the same thing to me. But I mean, it looks like some people want to basically legalize this industry that we've described as a scourge on the state for 20 years, but we can't seem to legislate it out of gas stations and whatnot, the little kind of slot machine things that you see people playing in places. And so legalize that potentially, and tax it. Casinos, up to 4 new casinos around the state. And then the iGaming people, which is basically casino games on your phone. They're like, well, wait a minute. If y'all doing all this, why don't you just do ours too? And so it's starting to become this Christmas tree that everybody wants to hang an ornament on, right? Which is what happens when you just keep the session open interminably, is everybody's idea starts to pop up, and eventually kind of it collapses under its own gravity at some point. And I'm willing to bet that's where we're headed. And some of these things fall apart, but what do I know? So
yeah, I don't know. It could be a very long budget with a lot to look into. Non-budget stuff. Earlier this week on the energy policy front, both the House passed SB 678. Senate already passed that one unanimously. It would count nuclear power plants in the same kind of sustainability category in state law as solar and wind energy. Duke wants that. That's part of kind of this ongoing push in the state to have Duke Energy, reduce its carbon footprint by 2030 and 2050. And the bill was sponsored by former Duke Energy President Paul Newton. So that moved forward. There was some opposition from some of the environmental groups who were worried about nuclear waste, but in the end, it seems that people say, well, nuclear is better than coal. Better than natural gas, at least in terms of the carbon footprint, and let's just go ahead and get this done. Yeah,
and that passed the House 107-12. I'm going back and looking it up now, so headed to the Senate where the previous version of it had passed 48-0. Yeah. So it sounds like there's peace in the valley on that one. There was a predatory real estate bill that also passed this week.
Yes, speaking of kumbaya and unanimous support, apparently there are these shady real estate brokers around the state who've been getting folks to trade a lien on their house, sometimes up to like 40 years, in exchange for just a few $100, maybe a few $1,000. And apparently they're particularly preying on elderly folks. And GOP lawmakers have been concerned about this. Democrats have been concerned about this. And they actually came together and got something done about it. House Bill 422 will stop such practices in the future, or at least really, really reduce them. And make it harder for these predatory practices to go on.
Yeah, and at least some of this ties back to a company called MV Realty, which our investigates team here at WRAL has done some reporting on, and I believe the Attorney General has pushed back against as well. So you can look for that reporting on WRAL.com.
There you go. One thing that looks like it's not going to be happening is a crackdown on CBD and kratom. That'll probably still be allowed to be sold in gas stations. There was a push to not make it illegal, but make it much harder to sell it, require a license, things like that. And we heard from some Republicans that they're concerned about CBD, especially being a gateway for teens using marijuana. However, the Department of Agriculture, from what we heard, had a fairly frosty reaction to this proposal. They've been counting for years on hemp to kind of be a new cash crop in the state, especially as tobacco demand continues going down. So that passed one committee, but then very quickly got shuffled to the side and did not move forward along with everything else that was moving forward. So that appears to be dead for now. Who knows when if they ever get back to debating medical marijuana, maybe some more CBD restrictions might surface in that to, kind of satisfy some of the more socially conservative members. But for right now, that appears to be dead.
Yeah, that was a bill that, like a lot of bills at this part of a session, as it, like we talked about, goes on interminably, felt like a bill that had enough energy to create a wave that broke on the beach, but the tide ain't coming in. No. You know what I mean? Like it all right, you get your hearing, but that's as far as it's going to go.
All right, well, Travis, what else did I miss as you have been catching up on your notes coming back from vacation? What else stuck out to you?
Senate Bill 176 passed the Senate, among other things. This was apparently kind of controversial because it was a party line vote in the Senate, and I didn't listen to any of the debate. I'm reading the bill and I'm looking at the vote. But so if you're going to sue somebody, the way I understand this one is someone can give you a loan for what you're going to get on the lawsuit, up to $400,000, and then you got to pay them back. But there are concerns that it's kind of a predatory practice, that people
seems risky.
That people will sign things without necessarily understanding that they're not going to get a big settlement, and then they're going to be on the hook for this loan. So this would allow that practice going forward. It was a Senate Bill 176, again, party line vote. Wednesday in the Senate, that's sitting now in the House. Senate Bill 323, that went to the governor this week, just nearly unanimously. And the way I read it is it forbids the Department of Health and Human Services from closing or reducing the number of adult developmental and vocational programs. So these are places where people with significant disabilities go, and they're paid very little, but it's a place where they can do work. It's usually kind of routine work, like you build the same thing over and over again, small products that end up being sold. And it's you're paid less than minimum wage. There was a big lawsuit to try to change this practice, but some of the families involved, where their kids, even adult kids, go to these places, were like, well, please don't close this. This is important to him, important to her, important to us. And so there's then this back and forth in that world between families and these providers and a watchdog group that pushes for disability rights in not only in North Carolina but across the country. So this is kind of slowing the roll on the implementation of that lawsuit. I believe it passed nearly unanimously. And then finally, I note H447. This is the motor vehicle dealer laws, passed unanimously. I don't know what it does.
Yeah, I don't believe there was much, if any, debate on that. It certainly did not stick out to me if there was.
Yeah, it's always one of those things where because I assume North Carolina requires the existence of automobile dealers. Like you can't sell, if you build a car, you can't sell it direct. You have to go through a dealer.
That's a big thing.
Yeah, they had good lobbyists back in the day, I guarantee you that. But so those rules get rewritten from time to time, and that's what's happened in this bill, H447, if you're interested.
Yeah, and Travis, I believe you had a personal note too here.
I don't know that it's a personal note. I just thought the Democratic Party did some interesting messaging today. Apparently, it's Lieutenant Governor Mark Robinson's 55th birthday, and they sent out a reminder of 55 things he said that they felt were controversial and were, in fact, in many cases, quite controversial. And I think my point there was just like maybe don't give people 55 things that you said that they can point to.
I read through the list, and I think there is a lot in there that will probably offend people on either side of the aisle, but there's also a lot of stuff in there that could just bolster his standing in the GOP primary. And this was something that I kind of looked into this week, too. There were some new details that we unearthed about an eviction that he had back in 2012 for some unpaid rent. He still hasn't paid the landlord back. I talked to the landlord. If you want to read that story, it's online, nccapital.com.
The most interesting thing to me about that story was there was a part where they owed $2,000 to this guy, and they got evicted. This is in 2012. And they didn't pay it back, still haven't paid it back.
Right.
And as I pointed out on Twitter, like we can all understand if you're getting evicted, you don't have $2,000 to give back. But that's not what Robinson's campaign said was the reason they didn't pay back the $2,000. One of the things, at least, that they told you was, well, when you're evicted, that's a legal process. And then there's a secondary legal process where if the landlord wants to get their money back, they can file that. And this landlord didn't, so we didn't pay. And I don't understand a campaign strategy where you would say, oh, I didn't pay that money owed that guy because he didn't sue me the correct way.
Yeah. I mean,
this is the Robinson campaign saying this.
Yeah. It's true, but yeah, it's not a type of political statement that you usually see. I will just say that.
On the Democratic Party's list of 55 things, was the one in there, because I couldn't read all 55, I ain't got that kind of time, people, where he suggests television is literally the devil because Lucifer means light and televisions put light out?
I don't think I saw that one. I guess I didn't make to up 55.
That one's underutilized.
But, so when I'm reporting this story, though, on, this unpaid rent, I talk to people and ask them, do voters actually care about this? And I talked to a lot of Republicans for this story, talked to some political scientists, and they all said, I mean, not really. This is news, this thing about the eviction, but there's been plenty of other reporting on his other financial problems. He's got a criminal record, he's got bankruptcies, he's got liens for unpaid taxes, and it hasn't really put a dent in his standing at all.
Well, that's the narrative, right? He came from poverty in Greensboro. He has struggled in his life. He has been a blue-collar working guy, and he has risen above those troubles, those bankruptcies, gotten out of them, and been very successful. It's an extremely compelling story, which is why I don't know why you would say the guy didn't sue me right. But anyway, I'm gonna get off my soapbox on that one. He actually, the lieutenant governor, had better attendance in the state senate than I did on Wednesday, which I believe is a first for the last few months of this legislative session, because I hadn't seen him in the Senate in quite some time. But he was in the Senate for the veto overrides, I believe, on Wednesday.
He was, and I think it's probably because there were several bills dealing with transgender issues that were being overridden. He wanted to be there for that. But you're correct. I mean, we rarely ever see him at the Senate, even though the lieutenant governor's job is to preside over the Senate. And he it actually elicited some laughter from the chamber a few times. And I think he himself admitted that he was a little rusty. Some awkward pauses where he didn't really know the proper procedure for what came next.
Which is not the simplest thing in the world,
no,
let's be clear.
It's pretty arcane. He said somebody's name wrong. There was just, a few instances where it's like, yeah, he has not been here.
Yeah. And Lieutenant Governor Dan Forrest, when he was running for governor, his attendance was a little bit better, but not great. And I don't know of any Republicans who've complained about this. It's not like it.
No, it's not.
Unless you're going to have a tie vote, it's not crucial. It's just like you're the guy who kind of runs things from the chair. So
exactly, and there have not been any tie votes. Other statewide races, in addition to the governor's race, obviously the attorney general's race is going to be big next year, and Dan Bishop is coming in hot on the GOP side for that one. There's some reporting that he raised close to $1 million in just the first few days of his campaign, and then RAGA, the Republican Attorneys General Association, big national group, said that they're going to drop over $4 million on him for that race. So they're kind of seeming to clear the way for him for the GOP nomination. Tom Murray is also running in that primary, former state lawmaker from Morrisville. But all the big money seems to be on Bishop's side. Obviously, a sitting member of Congress, has the ear of national groups to get some of that money.
Yeah, it's got to be tough for Tom Murray to look up and the Republican, like the races, the primary was barely even started. They're like, yeah, we're going to spend $4.5 million.
Yeah,
it's like, okay, well, and that's in the primary and general together. So they will spend in the primary is one of the things there. In the Republican governor's race, I don't know if this happened. I think this was last week. Jesse Thomas, who is a former Blue Cross Blue Shield executive here in North Carolina, he announced that he's running for the Republican nomination for governor, and then he put a video out. It's not on television; it's a digital ad. But I thought it was interesting. He starts by kind of taking on Mark Robinson and like he's trying to be the adult in the room, like we need people who are serious, blah blah blah. But then it pivots to the legislature needs to get off its butt and pass Medicaid expansion, which is, I mean, I realize he's a healthcare executive, but it's about a 1.5-minute video if y'all want to go find it. But the tone is really striking, the way he takes Republican lawmakers to task for delaying the budget, specifically because it delays Medicaid expansion. I mean, it absolutely could have been Democratic messaging from 2 years ago.
Yeah.
So that's Jesse Thomas in the Republican governor's race. That's about all I got, other than a couple quick things, I think.
Yeah. That's all I got.
All right.
It's been a busy week, though.
Yeah. I read in the NC Tribune, John Hardester, no longer House Majority Whip. He's stepping down basically from that and becoming a deputy to spend more time on his race for labor commissioner.
Right.
Carl Gillespie will move up into the full whip. Speaker of the House, Tim Moore, said, don't expect anything next week. He said, don't expect us to caucus casinos in the House Republican caucus for a couple of weeks. And then I'll just finally note, this is the time where bills are just kind of sitting. And of course, we're the first year of a 2-year session, so things can move next year. But I looked, there are 900 bills that are either sitting in House or Senate rules, meaning they have passed either the House or they have passed the Senate, and they are sitting just in a holding pattern in rules. And I know there are some lobbyists who are kind of like, guys, if you're going to just keep being here, can you
at least do something?
Can you do the things that I need you to do?
Well, the budget could be a vehicle for that. There's always that kind of behind the scenes, horse trading going on with that. So
right.
We'll see if some of those pop up. Maybe the bill's dead, but the idea lives on in the budget, perhaps.
And the longer it goes on, in some ways, the harder it gets to keep track of it all. So people give us a call.
Yep. Always appreciate your tips. Thanks for listening.